The Jews celebrated Passover as they had for centuries, with roasted lamb, unleavened bread, bitter herbs, and 4 cups of wine. Jesus made plans to celebrate with the 12 disciples that he had named apostles. Jesus sent them into Jerusalem to prepare the traditional Passover meal. He joined them that evening. Then Jesus did something that surprised everyone. Jesus went. He got a towel and a wash basin, and he began to wash the disciples' feet. But when it was Peter's turn, he didn't think it was right for Jesus to be washing feet. People walked around in sandals on the dusty roads, and it was the job of a servant to wash the feet of a guest. But Jesus was not a servant. He was the master. Peter said, "Lord, are you going to wash my feet?" Jesus replied, "You don't know why I'm doing this, but you will understand later." Peter was not convinced, and he said, "You will never wash my feet." And Jesus replied, "Unless I wash you, you will have no part of me." So Peter said, "Then wash my hands and head as well, Lord." Jesus knew that Judas would betray him. Jesus also knew that the next day he would be crucified. It was not only Passover, it was Jesus' last meal with his disciples. As Jesus and his disciples were eating, Jesus again again surprised and upset all of the disciples. He looked around and he said, "Truly I tell you, one of you who is eating with me will betray me." All of the disciples looked around and said, "Surely it is not I." Peter then asked Jesus, "Who is it, Lord?" And Jesus replied, "It is the one I give this piece of bread to." Then he took the bread and handed it to the disciple Judas. And he said, "Do quickly what you are going to do." Then Judas left immediately. Most of the disciples Then Jesus took a loaf of bread.
¡Maestro, está furioso! ¡Celso, córteme el pelo nuevo!
Jesus took the bread. He broke it into pieces. He gave a piece to each of the 11 remaining disciples. And then he said, "This is my body." His body is given for each of you. Do this in remembrance of me. Then he took a cup of wine. He said, "Drink from it, all of you. This is my blood of the covenant, which is poured out for many for the forgiveness of sins." I will never again drink wine until the day when I drink it new with you in my Father's kingdom. After the Passover meal, Jesus then led his disciples out, and they went to a deserted garden called Gethsemane. There in Gethsemane, they began to pray. He prayed to his Father in heaven, that he could somehow be spared the agony of the crucifixion that he knew was about to face. But above all, Jesus was determined to complete his earthly mission. He closed his prayer by saying, "My Father, if this suffering cannot be avoided, let your will be done." Jesus often went to Gethsemane with the disciples, and Judas knew this was the perfect place to arrest Jesus without attracting any attention. The chief priests and the elders of the temple sent an armed mob with Judas, and Judas told the mob he would identify Jesus by giving him a kiss, the common form of greeting at the time. Now Judas arrived with the mob sent by the priest. He went up to Jesus, kissed him, and said, "Greetings, Rabbi." This was the signal for the mob to take Jesus captive. But Peter, wanting to defend Jesus, drew his sword and cut off the ear of the high priest's servant. But Jesus said, "Put away your sword. All who take the sword will die by the sword. Don't you know that I could ask my Father and he would send legions of angels to protect me? But the scriptures say it must happen this way." The mob grabbed Jesus and took him to the house of Caiaphas, the high priest. But all of the disciples ran away in fear that they would also be arrested.